We're chatting today with Mr. Barton Clarke, who is the Executive Director of the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute, that's CARDI, a community institution. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Clarke. I hope you're keeping safe.
Yes, thank you very much, Antine, for your salutation, and I bring you greetings from all of CARDI and the Caribbean.
Thank you, thank you. It seems just a short while ago that we were talking about resilience in the context of natural disasters, especially the devastating hurricanes that we had a few years ago. Um, then, just as we were getting ourselves together, here comes COVID-19. Could you tell us what the impact of the pandemic has had on agriculture in CARICOM, agriculture and food security?
The impact is quite varied on agriculture and food security. On the one hand, we've had the fact that with the disruption in the tourism sector, which is a significant part of economic well-being in the Caribbean, hotels are closed, restaurants are closed, entertainment opportunities are also not forthcoming. What we have found is that in a number of member states, there is a surplus of that which would normally have been supplied to the hotel sector, such as poultry and pork and vegetables. On the other hand, and in fact, this issue with poultry is manifest in Belize and Jamaica, and in Barbados. What we've seen is some response as well in terms of placing additional amounts of this stuff and so on into cold storage. We've also saw where there was disruption in the trade between St. Vincent and Barbados and St. Vincent and Trinidad and Tobago, initially as a consequence of COVID because we were on lockdown and the ports were closed. We've seen as well too an increase in evidence of predator larceny because it would appear as though whilst there's been, the farmers and things have not been able to go to their farms initially, some of those who didn't make that investment in farming and so on have taken advantage of that situation. Now, as the farming community was identified as part of the essential services, and farmers are begun to go back onto their farms, we are seeing some relief in that regard. And a number of these issues are exacerbated by the fact that we are experiencing a significant drought at this time. Only this morning, we noted from the Trinidad Press where a major duck operation in Trinidad were trying to sell off as many of the ducks as possible because something of a shortage of water. So these are some of the impacts and so on that we have seen regarding the agricultural sector. Now, in terms of food.
Before you go on, Mr. Clarke, what's the significance of the lapse in trade between St. Vincent and the other countries?
Well, traditionally, this is time immemorial, there is this trade in agricultural produce within the region. You have boats leaving regularly from St. Vincent coming to Barbados, going down to Trinidad. You got produce leaving Dominica, going to Guadeloupe, going to Martinique, going to Montserrat, to BVI, etc. And when those ports were closed, it means that trade and thing was disrupted. When it was identified that food was part of the essential requirement to keep those populations going, what you then saw and thing was arrangements which were put in place by the authorities from the two different destinations in order to ensure that there was this supply. Because what happened in the case of Trinidad was that given that the ports were closed, given that they were not allowing people to come in, given, however, that they still needed the food supply, what they agreed was that the produce could land, but not the people. So that the produce the persons then had to establish some contact in the Trinidad space or the Barbados space to distribute the produce on their behalf. So that is what happened, I think, in those particular circumstances, right?
Okay.
Now, what is of significance in terms of our food security is the fact that the greater proportion of what we consume, except for Belize and Guyana, is imported. We still import significant amounts of, we could import lots of wheat flour, corn and soybean for our poultry and pig operations. We import poultry, we import sugar, and a number of other things. And what we have seen is some disruption in the supply chains. You've had the closure of manufacturing operations in the United States, and some of the traditional supply routes were disrupted as a consequence of COVID-19. Fortunately, part of the resilience agenda that is practiced by the Caribbean as it relates to food is that usually there is a fair supply of food in the countries at any one time. So we've got announcements recently from Guyana, from St. Vincent, from Barbados, indicating, look, we have adequate amounts of food and things for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, depending on which country and thing it was. Of course, Guyana and Belize, given that most of their food and thing comes from within their domestic space, they are not similarly challenged. But as supply disruptions continue in international markets, you would anticipate that there may be challenges down the road in terms of the food supply chains in the marketplace. Other than that, with the closure of the systems in all of the countries, lockdown, as we said in all of the countries, we've had, and then you had some regulation regarding and so on, where the supermarkets can remain open only for a certain amount of time. There are systems that have emerged where, you shop by name, so you can go out on Wednesday or Friday, as the case might be, right? But fine, that works well for those who have resources. There is a section of the community, however, who live really on the line, whose cash flow is rather weak, and consequently are not really able to stock up. And therefore, they need to go to the supermarket or the local shops regularly. And that is further compounded by the fact that with the closure of the economies, closure of businesses, people being sent home, it meant that they were then challenged to be able to supply themselves and things with all that they need. A number of the governments, however, have stepped in and have put arrangements in place in order to be able to supply those persons with some either cash transfers or vouchers or food cards, as the case might be, in order to be able to help them through this very, very difficult time. In addition to that, the governments, a number of cases, I think, have put some kind of unemployment benefit in place. $600 per month in the case of Barbados, $1,500 TT in a month in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, to help those persons who have been displaced from the workforce to cope in these circumstances.
Okay, we're hearing a lot now about import substitution, and there is active encouragement for people to begin backyard gardening. What would CARDI recommend in these circumstances for the layman, for the ordinary person?
Well, we are supporting the initiatives for backyard gardening in all of the member states where they exist. In Grenada, we are producing seedlings and we are supplying backyard garden. In fact, what we've seen in Grenada is that traditionally our plant of material would have been going to the commercial farmers. Increasingly, however, we are seeing a greater number of persons and so on who are trying to help themselves in their own home yard space, accessing those seedlings. There's a very active program in Antigua as well too, where we're trying to support them, not only in terms of seedlings, but also in terms of technology and in terms of technical advice and backup technical support in order to ensure that they have some measure of success. On the wider front of import substitution, we import in excess of $4 billion worth of food, right? Now, fortunately, the Conference of Heads of Governments precipitated a submission from the newly formed Caribbean Private Sector Organization with the challenge of reducing the food import bill of the Caribbean by 25% by 2025. Yes, COVID-19 and so on is with us now, and therefore we're looking at that issue regarding whether or not it will be 25%, or will it be 50%, or will it be 10%. But suffice to say that the mood expressed by all the political directorate, the farming community, the business community, is this commitment to long-term food security for the Caribbean, and which would necessitate what we are saying now, which is interest and involvement and investment by the private sector. Because when we look at the issues that we have to contend with and things, the big items that we are importing, this really requires and so on public sector investment with supportive public sector environments. What are the new trade policies that might obtain? What are the new incentives? What is the investment that is required, and where can we source the investment? And how are we dealing with the issues of pre-deal larceny? How are we dealing with issues of crop insurance? How do we deal with addressing the issues of sanitary and phytosanitary measures to facilitate greater trade and things across the Caribbean? How are we dealing with the ease of business facilitation that will allow for greater investments? How do we deal with the issues of cross-border investment, that you have a demand in Barbados, but the investment in production and marketing is in Guyana, but then the produce and thing flows to Barbados or flows through Trinidad, where we take advantage and so on of the low cost and thing of manufacturing, and then in order to be able to supply the Caribbean. How do we make more of that happen? How do we address transportation? The key issue, having got the produce, how do we then move the produce? All is not lost in a sense. In other words, there is some experience that we already have that we can build upon. We already have significant production of corn in Belize, and we've seen in the past shipment of corn from Belize to Jamaica, to Guyana, to Trinidad. Yes, the Belize's corn crop was impacted negatively by the drought of 2019 and early 2020. But the fact is that we've had this trade arrangement in place. We know traditionally that we have citrus pulp coming out of Belize that moves to the Southern Caribbean. We know that Eastern Caribbean mills in St. Vincent has investments in rice in Guyana. So we do have these experiences that we can ramp up on in order to be able to facilitate what we want to do. And we were very encouraged in listening to the last quoted Ministers of Agriculture meeting, where there was particular reference made to the very new movement of bananas from Suriname to Barbados, and so therefore the transport was in place, the business arrangement was in place, the facilitation by the political directorate and the public sector was in place, and it happened. So we are encouraged that we can deal with this matter going forward.
Okay, and there is a very comprehensive plan that CARDI has in place. I'm sure it will have all those elements that you just spoke about, but delve a little deeper into that comprehensive plan, short and long term prospects.
Well, firstly, let me clarify. This is a CARICOM plan.
Okay.
CARICOM meaning the triumvirate of the member states, the secretariat, and the regional institutions, right? There is a facilitating and coordinating mechanism, which is the cluster, the Agriculture, Food, and Nutrition Security Cluster that was established I think by CARICOM, which is chaired by CARDI, which would have been in the vanguard of this matter. And the draft document was presented to the quoted, the special quoted meeting of the Ministers of Agriculture, got the approval from them, and was then subsequently and so on presented to the heads of governments and things for their consideration, right? In the short run, we're trying to get the member states to supply the information on what do they have that can be traded within the region. What do they need from the rest of the region? Because we heard earlier about the surpluses that we have in poultry and stored in cold storage in Barbados and Jamaica. Can some of that now be supplied into other parts of the Caribbean? Buttressed, of course, by the fact that the ministers of agriculture back in 2016 approved a number of poultry operations in the Caribbean to facilitate, and this is the SPS approval that was given to facilitate trade from those operations within the rest of the Caribbean. Right? There's a coordinate. Each ministry have identified a contact person. There is a team, a cooperating team that has been established with the chairman being the Minister of Agriculture from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Honorable Sobota Caesar, and then looking at transport arrangements, liaising with the transport group within the CARICOM Secretariat, who've been busy looking at this matter of transportation, and to see to what extent that we can facilitate the use of the Caribbean carriers and helping to deal with the issues of transportation. Those are some of the short-term measures that have been identified. We note that the Caribbean Airlines have established a cargo service. In fact, much to do was made recently about movement of cargo from Guyana and to Cuba, and we are sincerely hoping that we're able to get the movement of produce also from across the Caribbean so that we can deal with this challenge and so on in the Caribbean. The long term is like, of course, the other two part of the short term is that getting the private sector involved, which is going to necessitate greater attention on things to trade facilitation, greater attention on things to building the business environment that allows them and things to make these investments, greater attention on things to working out the SPS protocols that would facilitate the movement and thing of these and eliminate this matter and thing as a non-tariff barrier. And the Caribbean Agriculture and Food Safety Agency has already been tasked to collaborate and thing with the member states to arrive at these protocols, working in collaboration with the meeting of chief veterinary officers as well as the Caribbean plant health directors. Then to look at the preparation of investment profiles and preparing the business cases that would then facilitate the investments and things by the private sector. Looking at where the investments and things are likely to come from, looking at the potential by collaborating with the Caribbean Development Bank, by the CARICOM Development Fund, with regard to, and like I said, let me reiterate, the most significant thing is really the interface with the private sector to encourage them to look at the possibilities. And we are confident, given their presentation to the heads of governments, where they identified a number of commodities to be targeted: poultry, eggs, coconuts, cassava, vegetables, to help to reduce the Caribbean food import bill. The quantity that represents about $400 million US in terms of what the value of what we know import. So if we target replacing these, this is the kind of the impact and so on that will have on the Caribbean economies and things to start with. Attention to strengthening the capacity to produce the necessary technologies and technology packages through research and development. And in that sense and so on, strengthening CARDI and CAPSA and the CRFM to be able to support these undertakings in collaboration with the capacities that we have in the member states. Because this really is not about any single entity, but it's really about this conglomerate of resources, technical resources that we have in the region, and bringing it to bear on helping and seeing to facilitate the matter. Resource mobilization, interfacing with the Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Food Program, the National Fund for Agricultural Development, to help mobilize resources and things for the undertaking. Deployment of information and communication tools to help us and so on to expedite the rate at which we produce, the way we trade, the way we process. And when I say process as well, too, I'm reminded that the key element is to engagement with the private sector processors, the manufacturers, because note that a lot of the foods that we consume are manufactured. And therefore, we have some manufacturing capability in the Caribbean. How do we deploy them in order to be able to help prepare new products, novel products, or even substitute products regarding food supply within the Caribbean?
When do you anticipate that we will get back to an even keel in agriculture and food security?
The notion of an even keel will have to be defined. What I do know is that in the next year, 2 years, right, until we resolve issues on the health side, in terms of vaccine, in terms of contact tracing, in terms of putting the necessary protocols in place to mitigate the impact and thing of the disease, right, we have to operate and live with COVID, right? So in CARDI is now engaged in preparing protocols regarding how it will work in this COVID environment. Because as we relax and we begin to reopen, right, then we are going to work. Some of us and things are working from our home and will continue to work from our home. Some we have work in the field, and therefore we have to go to the field if we're running experiments and things in the field, or if we have to go to the lab to do experiments, we have to go and deal with that. A lot of work that we do is with respect to training, and we're looking at the utilization of information and communication tools to help deliver this training so that we minimize contact on things. So, because we are blessed with a fairly high degree of penetration of mobile telephones and things within the Caribbean, and we already see some examples of deployment of drones by RAD in Jamaica to help with the agricultural endeavor. Same thing is occurring in Belize. We see the poultry sector where they're managing their operations in these sophisticated wind tunnel pens and so on, using the telephone that has sensors related to temperature and humidity that can be adjusted and things, using your phone, etc. So more of that, so that not only will we be operating within a in a COVID environment, but also operating in what will be the new norm, which is an increased deployment of information and communication technology tools to the very fabric of life in the Caribbean. This calls really for a key ingredient going forward is that collaboration and cooperation and communication. That we have to ramp up the interface between what's happening within the national space with what is happening within the regional space. Yeah. We have to have, we have the interface. We're going to have wider interface with the ministries of health, ministries of environment, ministries of trade, and ministries of agriculture, that we have to work in a coordinated manner the support that will be coming from our traditional partners such as the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture and the Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Food Program and the like. So, but all that needs to be coordinated in a manner so that the private sector can obtain the benefits that helps to facilitate their investments in this sector. The other issue is that we acknowledge that each of the member states have come up with some kind of a production plan, agricultural production plan in response to COVID-19. A lot of the issues are similar across the countries. Producing more root crops, producing more vegetables, because in addition to COVID-19, there is also a decided consciousness that we also have to address chronic non-communicable diseases. Given when we see some of the statistics coming out of United States and elsewhere about issues of chronic non-communicable diseases, that there seem to be a risk factor regarding, I think, your ability to recover from COVID-19. So the extent to which we can use this vehicle to further inculcate in the minds of the people that we need to take advantage of eating properly, increase vegetables, increase fruits, increase our root crops, that we also need to do that. But then there is this issue as well too about the regional space. How do we take advantage of the land resources and water resources of the well-endowed countries such as Guyana, Suriname, Belize, Jamaica, and Haiti to produce for the region? Okay, I believe that each ministry has, like I said, engineered a plan to treat with increasing production within their own space. To my mind, part of the responsibility of CARDI and CARICOM and the rest of the cluster is to look particularly at this area of how do we increase production in those well-endowed states for the benefit of the rest of the region. How do we take on the challenge of producing the corn and the soybean, et cetera, that we need for our poultry and pork feed and pig feed, okay? So this is an area that we have to pay greater attention to. And then the other area, that I feel that obviously is going to be necessary is how do we ensure that we engage the manufacturing sector, given that a lot of what we consume is processed, and given that you need to be able to put these in a form that would allow for consumption and which they suggest that at the center of all this discussion and deliberation, we have to put the consumer. So it is really responding to what the consumers require, because changing their mindset is going to be a very long process. But CARDI is here, ready, willing, and able to support agricultural development in the Caribbean for obtaining Caribbean food and nutrition security. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clarke.